Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. It's Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 7th of December 2023. I have a feeling this could be the second of three because my goodness, there's a lot to talk about again today. It's a crazy week, mainly because of the activities of the American political system in Congress at the moment. So a lot to talk about there, a lot to unpick. Right, we'll start with military aid and then go on to the vote in Congress yesterday and what this means. The Pentagon still has about $6 billion left for military aid to Ukraine, according to US Defense Department spokesman Pat Ryder. Now, this is almost certainly the $6 billion miscalculation that happened. So it's the idea that actually they used the wrong pricing or value evaluation mechanism for their equipment that they were sending to Ukraine, like book value versus, different ways of accounting what this stuff is worth, as I've talked about previously. And it turns out they used the wrong mechanism for their accounting, and that freed up $6 billion worth. I mean, it goes to show that it's not money, they're not paying for anything. It's not like we've got $6 billion and we paid you for that. It's like we're putting a valuation on this of X. Oh, it turns out actually that was the wrong valuation mechanism and it's actually worth Y. There's no money swapping hands here. So, that's important to note. But it does mean they do have this emergency kind of $6 billion left. That's not an awful lot, to be honest. Without additional funding, the Pentagon will soon reach a point where it will not be able to maintain the current level of supplies, a military spokesperson says. Now, on the back of that, they have released another $175 million package of aid to Ukraine. So although all this crazy stuff's going on in Congress, there is still some eking out of that $6 billion that they can do for as long as that takes. And what the US given to Ukraine here were AIM-9M and AIM-7 missiles for air defense, additional ammunition for HIMARS, 155 and 105 mil artillery shells, high-speed anti-radiation missiles, those HARMs, that's the missiles you get to shoot at radar systems that help air defense, so on and so forth. Tube launch, optically tracked wire-guided tow missiles. So those are the ones that are predominantly on top of Bradleys. Javelin 84 armor systems, anti-armor systems, goodness me, I can't read. More than 4 million rounds of small arms ammunition, vehicles to tow and haul equipment, demolition munitions for obstacle clearing, equipment to protect critical national infrastructure, and spare parts, maintenance, and other ancillary equipment. So still keeping those very necessary, particularly ammunition stocks replenished in Ukraine. Representatives of the government and industry of the United States and Ukraine signed an agreement to accelerate the joint production of weapons at a conference held in Washington today. This is a really important conference held that is shoring up the cooperation between the Ukrainian defense and US Department of Defense administrations, such that, well, as you can see here, such that Ukraine can stand more successfully on its own 2 feet, particularly in light of political issues that may get in the way of, say, the US providing direct aid to Ukraine. Now, as long as Ukraine can still get hold of money in order to be able to produce that equipment, then hopefully they can continue to sustain themselves more and more as this war goes on. And as Zelensky says here, we are holding the Defense Industrial Base Conference, the DFNC1 US edition, today in Washington. So this is where he appealed to all these defense contractors or defense manufacturers around the world to come and help Ukraine to build up its defense capabilities and capacity. To increase cooperation and joint defense projects between Ukrainian and American defense companies. Now, the benefit of this is you're appealing to people's business acumen, you're appealing to people's greed and money, essentially. You're saying, like, you can make money doing work with Ukraine. It will be good work that has a moral value in terms of Ukraine being able to defend itself against an aggressive invader. So you can feel good about yourselves, but also you're going to be making money. So if you want to make profit, come and help Ukraine. Ukraine does not wish to rely solely on partners. Ukraine aspires to and is capable of becoming a security donor to all of our neighbors once it has ensured its own safety. This is absolutely feasible and realistic. Now, this is pretty cool thinking. What Ukraine need to do is find a way to present themselves as a return on investment to investors. And by investors, I mean other governments, defense concerns, and so on and so forth. So if you have a government saying, right, okay, we're going to give you X billion dollars worth of kit or money for reconstruction or whatever, obviously those governments are going to want their own return on investment in terms of, like, we want our companies involved in that reconstruction work, or we want this, or we want that, or we want to do a trade deal with you, or whatever, that sunflower oil, we'd like it at this price, or whatever it is that happens when they do these deals is not charity, right? But Ukraine can also say, and by the way, when this war ends, we will have a really highly trained, very experienced armed forces that can assist you with your security going forward. So, you scratch our back and we'll be able to scratch your back at a later point. And I think that's a really good line to take for Zelensky here. So once we've ensured our own safety, we can be a security donor. We can help you out. I invite all American defense companies to work with Ukraine. Together we can create a new and powerful arsenal of freedom that will provide dependable support to all of the world's free nations. This is arsenal of freedom, arsenal of democracy that we've heard Biden talk about previously. Together we can accomplish much more than any of us could alone. So let us keep working together for the greater power of freedom. Our team is in Washington right now and will present specific perspectives and opportunities, and we'll return to that in a little bit later. Now, at the same time, Ukraine has submitted a request to the US for, and this is really interesting because this is a bunch of equipment that people have talked about in different times, but not really, there's been no official discussion about them, it seems. Anyway, Ukraine have submitted a request for Apache and Black Hawk helicopters. They have one Black Hawk helicopter, I think, that's been delivered for special forces, or has been bought. But they're asking for Apache, Black Hawk, F-18 fighters. So that's your Super Hornets. Those are ones that can fly off aircraft carriers. They're used to flying off short runways. Australia has 40 of those kicking around, not doing a lot. A lot of talk about this. Now, previously, the Ukrainian Air Force, Yuri Ignat, said, we only really want to deal with two fighters. We don't want to confuse matters, and that's really going to be the F-16 and the Gripen, which things are afoot already to secure those planes and train pilots. But now they're talking about F-18s. This is very interesting. Globemaster aircraft, not too sure about them, as well as complex air defense systems like the THAAD, T-H-A-A-D. So that is the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or the Theater High Altitude Area Defense. It's an anti-ballistic missile defense system designed to shoot down short, medium, and intermediate range ballistic missiles in their terminal phase. So this is when they're coming down really super bloody fast, coming down from high altitude, and that's why they're so difficult to shoot down. And when you have something like a Kinzhal, although they've been able to shoot down Kinzhals with Patriots, this is another system that would be really useful. THAAD, or THAAD, was developed after the experience of Iraq's Scud missile attacks during the Gulf War in 1991. The interceptor carries no warhead, instead relying on kinetic energy of impact to destroy the incoming missile. So yeah, that's what it does. So it looks like it's had mixed success there, but then greater success onwards here. So much more recently, much greater success in after it's been tinkered with. So yeah, that would be hopefully a really useful system for them if they can get hold of that. Ukrainian Defense Ministry officials presented the list of weapons to meet the needs of the Ukrainian Defense Forces during a private meeting in Washington that was attended by officials and leaders of the US defense industry. And also, along with this, Ukraine and the USA have signed a statement of intent regarding joint production and exchange of technical information, according to the Pentagon. In particular, the Pentagon provided Ukraine with technological data for the start of production of Franken-SAM hybrid air defense systems. This is using older frameworks with newer missiles and sort of joining them together, and these kind of bolt-on missiles to chassis that wouldn't otherwise have used that, so on and so forth. I don't know exactly what they have in mind here, but it certainly seems like they've been looking at the Buk air defense systems and using things like your RIMS, your Sea Sparrow normally ship-launched anti-aircraft missiles, and they've adapted them to these because they can't get hold of those Soviet-era ordnance anymore. Anyway, Frank and Sam seems to be very much an official thing going on there. Norway and the UK are to launch a coalition for Ukraine. Norway and the UK will launch a joint coalition for support for Ukraine on December the 11th, according to the Norwegian Defence Ministry. This sounds really cool, very important, very useful. I wonder whether it will specialise in certain areas. So Norway and the UK have very strong navies. Being coastal, having huge coastlines, as both nations do, and a rich history of seafaring. I don't know if it will specialise particularly in those domains and how that will pertain to Ukraine. I don't know, but really good news, because what we're going to start to see is a lot of nations go, oh shit, the US appears to be in a right old pickle at the moment. There's a political impasse, and we're going to have to pick up the slack here. So let's front up. And it's really good news that the UK has announced budgets that are looking good for next year for Ukraine, and announced things that are really tangible like this, or hopefully tangible. Another couple of highlights. The Japanese government is going to help Ukraine with a $4.5 billion I guess that is an aid package. So the funds will be used for post-war reconstruction of the country, and that'll be coming from the World Bank. That's Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida saying that. Australia's imposed sanctions on 13 Russians, including members of the Russian Security Service, Prosecutor's Office, and the Investigative Committee, reports their Foreign Minister. And the United States will send a Minister of Strategic Industries of Ukraine a special advisor on combating corruption and attracting foreign investment, reports the White House. So the White House is very keen on making sure that they have all their ducks in a row with regard to answering critics who say, well, is our US equipment that we're giving to Ukraine, is that going to definitely get to the Ukrainian front line? Is it going to be siphoned off by the black market and so on and so forth? And they've got a lot of people and structures in place within Ukraine to make sure that doesn't happen. Okay, what else? EU will transfer 4 million euros for medical care of Ukrainian refugees, according to the European Commission. And the USA and Sweden have signed an agreement on defence cooperation. And we'll return to that in the next section, in the geopolitical section, if I have time in this video. Okay, so finally, for kind of the aid segment, before we get into Congress, a US company offers to help Ukraine build shelters using 3D printers. 3D printers are really coming into the spotlight at the moment in being able to help Ukraine in a number of different ways. So a Ukrainian delegation to the US has signed a memorandum with the company Diamond Age on cooperation in building shelters using 3D printers, the Strategic Industries Ministry announced on December the 6th. Good news there. Right. Let's now go to the House of, Senate. First of all, we're going to give the foundation here that the Ukrainian delegation has gone over to the United States, and that includes their defense minister and others as well. And they have met with the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, for whatever value that will have obtained. Quote, he expressed the hope that the initiatives that are extremely important for the protection of our state will be adopted, wrote the head of the President's Office, Yermak, after the meeting. Now, of course, as we know, there's just a priority list. And for the Republicans, Ukraine is, generally speaking, there are certain Republicans that this won't apply to. But for a lot, particularly the MAGA wing, Ukraine's down here, the border's up here. And we won't do anything on this until we sorted this out. This is just way, way more important. And you could probably argue that is the case for a lot of the electorate in the US, depending on what state you're looking at. The issue is, and we'll come on to this, I mean, Jake Bro did a really good video to show how much of a talking point this is, and it's not a realistic thing to solve in a way that Republicans are claiming. Anyway, before we get there, the US Senate failed. And I do understand, I've had people saying, Republicans saying they're unsubscribing to my channel because it appears that I'm just, pro-Democrat or whatever. I'm pro-Ukraine. I'm obsessed with Ukraine, right? So I want the US to do whatever will aid Ukraine the most. Now, that might mean that some of the domestic policies for me, for Americans, are way down my list of priorities. I'm British, and so the southern border in the US is less of a concern for me than what goes on in Ukraine. Ukraine is a real existential threat to global security for me. And so the southern border is less important. But I understand it's still really important to Americans. But I also understand that several governments with a trifecta, so, the president, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, like the last two Republican presidents have not done that solving. So I think it's incredibly interesting that they're now holding the Democrats to hostage over this. Well, they're holding Ukraine to hostage over this so that they get this thing achieved, yet they couldn't do that on their own watch. So I think there's an interesting bit of hypocrisy going on here, or I don't know. It's just, it all just doesn't sit very well with me. Anyway, the US Senate, I know I'm going to annoy some people. It's just, I'm sorry, I can't see this any other way. And if you look at a lot of other analysts who are not American, who are not themselves involved in, like, I'm either Democrat or Republican, because there's only two options. It's the narrowest form of democracy, the American democratic system. It's a two-party system, and that's it. There's no space for anyone else. And so therefore, if you say anything against the Republicans, Democrats go, yay, and Republicans go, I hate you. I can't believe you said that. And if you say anything against the Democrats, Republicans love you and Democrats hate you. So, however, it's really difficult when I see something, and many analysts see something as being really the fault of certain Republican politicians here. It's really hard not to blame Republican politicians. And then that will, of course, annoy people who are staunchly Republican, right? So anyway, with that in mind, the US Senate failed a procedural vote to begin work on legislation on providing emergency aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan worth about $106 billion. The meeting was broadcast on the US Senate website. So what happened? So they needed, this wasn't a 50-50 vote. You needed a vote of 60, and there are 100 senators, of which 51 are Democrats. And is it that at the moment? It is because of, was it Warnock pushed it over in Georgia? Nonetheless, you've got 51 Democrats and 49 Republicans. So you only need 9 Republicans to say, yeah, that's a good idea. We want that 106 billion. Not one single Republican voted for that procedurally. And that's what I talk about when this is a Republican-Democrat thing. I mean, that vote tells you everything you need to know about the hyper-partisanship of US politics at the moment. And Biden said failure to support Ukraine is just absolutely crazy. In fact, he said the failure to support Ukraine is just absolutely crazy. It's against US interests. We're going to get that in. So he's vowing to get it done. I mean, Janet Yellen, who, US Treasury, says, I've talked to members of Congress. My colleagues have. I think they understand this. That this is a dire situation, and we can hold ourselves responsible for Ukraine's defeat if we don't manage to get this funding to Ukraine that's needed. And I'm including direct budget support here because that's utterly essential. Yermak, so going over to Ukrainians, their chief of staff, Zelensky's chief of staff, saying it would be impossible to continue to liberate and give the big risk. It would give a big risk to losing this war. This is really, really troubling for the Ukrainians. Now, the US, in doing this, voting on this bill, the bill, after it goes through the House, the senators get a chance to mess around with it and then vote on it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So, okay, the US also wants to allocate $7.8 billion in direct military aid to Ukraine next year when they allocated $5.3 billion in January alone. So there's also this issue that bill is also a lot smaller than it really needs to be. So not only is it not getting through, it's just actually, so as Ukraine Battlemap here says, decreasing the amount that they allocate to Ukraine in a year to what they allocated in a month will prevent Ukraine from making any advancements. let's go on and talk a little bit about that as well. But before we get there, we've got John Ridge. I think it's John Ridge that talks on the video that I'm going to play you. So John Ridge, who's a munitions and missiles expert, he says, John Cornyn, so that's a Texas senator, you are my senator, and authored the Lend-Lease Act in 2022. So this is a pro-Ukraine Republican senator. Do your duty to your country, your constituents, and American national security by getting it extended in the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. So what's happened here? Well, okay. We talked about the Lend-Lease Act that allows the US to bypass Senate and just give equipment to, as they did in the Second World War, give equipment to Ukraine. And that was authorized up until September and ran out. And it was due to be in this sort of budgetary NDAA, and it got taken out. So they removed it. They removed the extension for the Ukraine Democracy Defense Lend-Lease Act through financial year 2024. I don't even know what to say, says John Ridge. What is going on there? Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative reauthorized through calendar year 2025. So someone says here, I believe the House recedes means that the Senate version of the bill language, which does not contain a provision, prevails. Someone says, look, can I get an explanation? What's this about? What does it mean? So John Ridge then says the conference report between the House and the Senate versions of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2024. The House bill contained a clause to reauthorize Lend-Lease for Ukraine through financial year 2024. The Senate bill didn't. The House's bill clause was stripped from the final bill. Which is odd because you would think, as someone says here, that the Senate is more pro-Ukraine than the House. So, and it didn't ever get used. So the Ukrainian government didn't want to use the Lend-Lease while the Presidential Drawdown Authority was available, but they wanted it reauthorized as an emergency option in case the PDA was exhausted, which it's looking like it's going to be exhausted, but they can't get Presidential Drawdown Authority back up and running without getting Lend-Lease back up and running. And now they've taken Lend-Lease out of that. So they're screwed either way. It's just, it's not looking good. So it's a conference report for the final version of the bill. As someone says here, both parties are adding stuff, taking stuff out, feeding each other out on what might get support and what won't. What passes eventually won't be recognizable from any previous version you've seen. Today's vote was only procedural, not any final verdict on aid. And John Ridge said this is a conference report for the final version of the bill. In this case, the last straw for uninterrupted military aid for Ukraine is scrapped. Some people say no, not over yet. But it is... Yeah, it is not cool. And in fact, it's worse than that. So this is what I think it's John Ridge here talking on Andrew Perpetual's live stream.
How do you want the bad news?
Sure.
And by the way, this was from, I think it was 2 nights ago. So this was the night before they did the voting on the bill, but this is what they were voting on.
I just got the text of the supplemental. And oh my God. So... this is not the final form the bill will be passed in, if it gets passed at all. This is just what the Senate Democrats have put forward, I guess, as their starting point. They released a summary of it, but I was able to find the full 167 pages like 10 minutes ago. It's not good. It's just not great. The presidential drawdown cap is only $7.8 billion for both Ukraine, Israel, and everywhere else on Earth. That's bad. The administration requested 7. The more realistic ask is like 30 billion. So this is like horrifically bad. USAI is okay.
So that's on all 3. So that's 7.8 billion. So here it says US also wants to allocate 7.8 billion in direct military aid to Ukraine. That's Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, where 5.3 billion was for Ukraine alone in January alone. So that's the difference.
It's at $13.5 billion the
USA.
rest of fiscal year 2024. That's okay. It should be higher, but it's okay considering these are all long lead time items for the most part. But yeah, the PDA cap increase is bad. It's really bad. And yeah, I don't know where to go from here.
So things are looking really, really challenging. Now, The Kiev Independent says Senate blocks Ukraine funding bill from advancing. 60 votes were needed to take it up, with all the Republicans opposing the legislation. And then, this people react with who owns the Republican Party. This is going to be divisive among supporters for American republicanism abroad who are supporters for Ukraine. So it's not great. It's interesting. So Chuck Schumer said, sad night for the Senate and America. Republicans block for funding for Ukraine, Israel, humanitarian aid for civilians in Gaza, funding for Indo-Pacific. If Republicans don't get serious about a national security package, Putin's going to walk right through Ukraine and Europe. It's interesting looking at replies to Chuck Schumer here. So Bella loves USA, right? So this is quite a big, real pro-Trump Twitter handle here. How it works: one, you pay taxes. Two, Biden send it to Ukraine. Wonder if English is your first language. Three, they send it back to Hunter. Four, Hunter gives it to the big guy. End of story. Right? Just be warned here. But we're going to talk about this in the geopolitical segment because there's a report that's come out on exactly this kind of stuff. So I look at this person and I think, you've got an interesting set of the way that you put all of these things in between little flags and emoticons and whatnot. Your English didn't seem great. I'm wondering if you are a Russian. You got blue tick. You appeared to me. I would put a good bet on you being a Russian troll. But you got 92,000 followers. It's incredible. And actually, when you look at all the stuff going on here, this is all divisive, utterly divisive. If you remember the sort of things I told you before about how these people operate and what they do is they blow up divisive things. And we're going to come on to that again, as I say, in a report which says exactly this. And then I look, and so it's just interesting this. You look at how this person has written their description. Hashtag walk away. Is that walk away from what? Is that walk away from the world? Walk away from Ukraine? Interesting. How that's written up there. So no to porn, no to DM, no to, I don't know, America? No. Anyway, if we come down here and we look at this person, DK, blue tick, American flags, pro-life, cancer survivor, pure blood, I like to make jokes, no list, back the blue, proud American, MAGA. And then you're thinking, really? Like, is this proud conservative? Just announcing everything, Trump. This is just trying to virtue signal your way into people's threads. So they're like, I like Trump, I bloody love you, brilliant. Or Trump girl there, Bella loves USA. But there's absolutely, in my book, there's no way this person is American. Return to God. He was asked, there's a really famous interview, he was asked what his favourite books were in the Bible, what his favourite parts of the Bible were, and he couldn't answer. And he's like, it was really embarrassing because he doesn't know the Bible because he's not religious. So if you really like God, I don't understand how evangelicals support Trump. Anyway, that's a whole other debate to be had. But just be warned, like, these people just are very, very similar in the way they do things, because they are not the people you think they are. They are almost certainly trolls. That's not to say that people don't have those opinions who are not trolls, but I bet my bottom dollar that Bella Loves USA is a troll, and then so was that other person that was put forward. They just look, they're cut from the same stone there, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, so Chuck Schumer said that. Now, this is oh no, that's in the wrong place. Dang, that was supposed to be in military aid. I forgot to talk about that. Right, so back to where I was. So the outcome of this war is going to be determined primarily by what the Ukrainians can do, but a very close second by what the United States can do. So that's Fred Kagan, who's basically senior fellow and CTP director. So he's actually one of the main guys for Institute for the Study of War. He's also American Enterprise Institute. So he is basically a neoconservative himself. This is where you get a lot of people slagging off the ISW from Russia. If Russian trolls try and slag off the ISW, oh, you use the ISW, I can't believe that. Oh, it's just a neocon. And they try and undermine the ISW by looking at it politically. This is just opportunism. So on the one hand, they'll be like, MAGA Trump supporter, which is like neoconservatism or populism to an extent. And on the other hand, they undermine things by saying, I'm appealing to you by not being that person, by you being, say, me being a liberal lefty, saying, oh my God, you pay attention to the ISW. They're just a bunch of neocon warhawks. So they'll use anything to undermine anything that you like as a pro-Ukrainian, right? But anyway, let's get back to Kagan, who says, according to Frederick Kagan, director of the American Enterprise Institute's Critical Threats Project and a former professor at the US Military Academy, the funding delays are already having very real consequences on the Ukrainian battlefield. The current counteroffensive against Russia is being scaled back, and future operations to regain lost territory are in doubt. The Ukrainians have to make a hard choice here. If they're not confident they're going to get anything else from the US, then they have to conserve what they have. What the Ukrainian military needs, he said, is tanks, armored personnel carriers, fighter planes, drones, and long-range weapons. In other words, everything. And the US is the only country that can provide this hardware quickly and in the amounts that Ukraine requires in the coming year. I mean, the talk about having 6,000 Abrams kind of goes towards that. And he says at the end, the outcome from this war is going to be determined primarily by what the Ukrainians can do, but a very close second by what the US chooses to do. Interesting article there looking at this whole issue. Now, as a response, possibly, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has said the US will continue to increase weapons production here and in Ukraine to support Ukraine's fight for freedom. I spoke at the Ukraine Defense Industrial Base Conference today to underscore US commitments to enhance industrial cooperation in Ukraine. So possibly that's, knowing that funding from the US is going to be a pretty tricky thing to negotiate, that actually, okay, what can we do? Let's get US business involved with doing work with Ukraine and possibly somewhat bypass the issues there. So if we can ramp up indigenous production with US help, then that could be a part solution. I mean, you got people like, Radu Hosu here, really annoyed. On Ukrainian Armed Forces Day, the US Congress voted against substantial new aid, although those who pay in blood for what the Western leaders proclaim as universal values are still in the trenches and awaiting the helping hand from those who in declarations said, with Ukraine to the end. And this was coming from a lot of Republicans as well. And apparently not so much anymore. There are a lot of Republicans who stood up and applauded Zelensky when he made speeches. Not anymore. It was all US domestic politics that stood to gain and not the fight against the terrorist state led by a war criminal. It's a spit in the face of those who are fighting in Ukraine for their internationally recognized territories illegally occupied by Russia, but also in the face of the volunteer soldiers from other countries who are fighting for not for money, as mercenaries would do, but for the same values that I repeat Western politicians claim. Today, the US also announced an aid package. And I've already talked about that. So here is what Jake Bro had to say about holding the Ukrainian aid to hostage, holding it hostage by demanding this immigration reform takes place. And this is coming from a former military man himself who is not avowedly left wing or anything like that, but he goes through, and I'm only taking it from the middle. He's already talked about how these same immigration issues have been going on for, he goes back to this 37 years ago. This Immigration Reform and Control Act of Ronald Reagan came in that supposedly solved it all. So these issues have been ongoing for an awful long time, and they haven't been solved.
Of 1986, Ronald Reagan solved the immigration problem by giving amnesty and citizenship to millions of people who came here illegally, increased border security, and reformed immigration. Problem solved. Ronald Reagan and the Republicans fixed immigration in 1986. This was 36 years ago. But what's this? Pat Buchanan in 1992 challenged the incumbent Republican president George Bush Sr. Here's the headline. The GOP candidate calls the invasion of illegal immigrants a national disgrace as border jumpers wait for him to leave so they can cross. This article is from May of 1992. This was 30 years ago. And we never fixed immigration problems. We never secured our border. This has been a problem my entire life. Why? Why haven't we fixed the problem? Why haven't we sealed up the border? Why haven't we reformed immigration? And it's because...
And by the way, his solution is pretty watertight. I mean, it would largely go to solving the issue.
Big business in the United States doesn't want to fix the problem. Without illegal immigration south of the border, more than likely the United States population wouldn't be growing. Birth rates have been declining for the last 30 years amongst established Americans, whatever you want to call them. And without illegal immigration, labor costs would be much higher, and economic growth would be much lower.
And interestingly, so the right wing in Germany has risen on the back of this, but Angela Merkel took on, 800,000 migrants, so refugees. She took in 800,000 to 1 million migrants in that whole post-Syria whole migration issue. And a lot of people are attacking her for being all left-wing, or she's not left-wing, but for, being all liberal with it's an economic decision. Absolutely. So when you've got a stagnating population, capitalism needs kind of continued growth. So you just need more and more, greater and greater consumption demand. And the best way to get that is by having a growing population. Now, when your population gets to a point where you are not having enough children, because the richer you are, the fewer children you have, generally speaking, on average, and the more educated, blah blah blah, you need to sustain that growth. So Angela Merkel said, well, 800,000 migrants, thank you very much. That will sustain that growth, and we'll get the economy back online. Well, this is kind of where Jake Bro's going with that.
If you enjoy seeing the stock market go up, if you enjoy seeing your retirement accounts and 401k go up, this has been accomplished through illegal immigration of tens of millions of migrant workers. So here's the solution. This is the solution that no politician will give. But I can solve illegal immigration. There's only one way. And the one way to solve illegal immigration is mandatory minimum prison sentences for any American who hires an illegal immigrant. So let's do an example. Let's say an American farmer hires 20 illegal immigrants to work on his farm. Mandatory minimums of 6 months in jail for each migrant worker. So that American farmer needs to go to jail for 10 years. Problem solved. If we stop hiring them, if we stop enticing migrant workers to come here for good jobs, they'll stop coming. So the solution is to put in jail American farmers, American small business owners, and suburban housewives who hire illegals to be nannies and to maintain their yards. So this is why in 40 years, illegal immigration in the United States has never been solved.
And interestingly, was it Mar-a-Lago, Trump's place? A lot of illegal immigrants involved in the construction and maintenance there, I think, if I remember correctly.
Because the solution is to punish people, not just with fines, but with prison time, who hire illegal immigrants. But nobody in Congress is ever going to do this because everyone likes the price of their avocados to be affordable. America is addicted to cheap labor on farms and in small businesses and construction and people who cut our lawns and nanny our children. So we're not having an honest debate in the United States. I would love to have one. I would love to get serious and solve this problem. But that's not what House Republicans are trying to do. They're trying to weaken support for Ukraine by tying it to an unsolvable issue, an issue they never intend to solve. Republicans controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House under George Bush in 2004. The Republicans controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House in 2016 under Donald Trump. And they never fixed immigration because they never intend to. It's just a political debate point to beat up on the Democrats in elections. So here is national security.
And I'll be interested to see what you think about that. I mean, I think that's a great solution. I mean, it's never going to happen, right? But that would stop, if you stop enticing people across the border, that's what I say about mass migration in Europe. So either one is because we assisted in some kind of war, or you look at Libya, you look at Iraq, you look at Afghanistan, you look at Syria. We get involved with foreign policy in these big wars. You get a lot of migration. Okay, well, don't do that, or don't have wars or whatever. Okay, it's easier said than done. And the other thing is, we need to make those places much more enticing to live, so that there isn't the desire to move to somewhere else to better your life, because we would all do that. We would all move somewhere. I moved somewhere to better my life. I moved from one area in my local sort of region to another area that was better when I was able to, because I wanted a better school for my kids. We all do that, but then we look down on people that do it, that try and move countries. That is a basic human desire to better you and your family's status, right? So in order to solve that, you need to not be enticing them. Okay, we can either shut down things here and or make it better over there, and some kind of balance of that will mean that these people will want to stay where they were born, because they have the ability to better their lives in their indigenous countries. So with the American border, it's not necessarily looking at bettering their own lives, but it's about saying, well, what's enticing you here? Well, cheap labor. Well, what's allowing you to get to get these jobs? Well, the fact that we're not punishing people for employing you, the fact that the very people that employ you are probably the people in government, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I'll be interested to see what you guys think about that. Anyway, that's enough for me. I'm going to have to do the geopolitical stuff later. There's a couple of bits in there that I came across that I really do need to speak to, so I'll flip them over to tomorrow. Anyway, take care, speak soon, toodle pips.